The Pale Court's homeworld was still wrapped in the slow, glittering aftermath of battle when Garrett Stone realized his hands were shaking. Not from fear. Fear had burned itself out somewhere between the second missile lock and the moment he'd rammed his fighter through the enemy flagship's collapsing shield, but from the delayed understanding that he was still alive. Around him, space was cluttered with glowing debris, fractured hull plates, and the drifting ghosts of weapons fire slowly fading into nothing. His cockpit smelled faintly of overheated circuits and recycled air that had worked far too hard today. "Okay," Garrett muttered to no one in particular. Note to self, never do that again. His ship's AI, which had been upgraded by 3 different engineers with very different opinions about personality modules, replied cheerfully that the probability of never doing that again was statistically low. Garrett told it to log that under optimistic assumptions and requested a status report that did not include the words catastrophic or miraculous. The AI failed at that immediately. Beyond his canopy, the enemy flagship broke apart in stages, as if reluctant to admit defeat. It had been massive, an angular fortress of black alloy and glowing crimson seams, designed less to fly and more to impose its will on whatever star system it occupied. Garrett had destroyed it by exploiting a thermal imbalance no one had noticed, because no one else had been desperate enough to try. The maneuver would later be taught in military academies under sanitized names. Garrett would remember it as screaming, swearing, and trusting math he'd learned half asleep years ago. The Pale Court's fleet regrouped around their world, elegant vessels gliding into formation with a discipline that bordered on reverence. Their ships were beautiful in a way human designs rarely bothered with. Smooth curves, pale hulls etched with faintly luminous markings, engines that whispered instead of roared. As victory signals rippled through the comm channels, Garrett caught fragments of alien speech, musical and formal, layered with emotion that needed no translation. Relief, awe, gratitude, and something else, quieter, focused unmistakably on him. A transmission cut through the noise, encoded with Pale Court command authority. Garrett straightened automatically, wiping one trembling hand on his flight suit before accepting it. The image that resolved made him pause. Queen Vesrin stood upon the command deck of her warship, pale skin catching the light of distant stars, black hair falling neatly over her shoulders. She appeared human at first glance, as so many of her people did, until the eye lingered and noticed the long ears sweeping back in elegant arcs, adorned with delicate metallic bands that marked her rank. Her posture was flawless, her expression composed, yet her eyes carried the weight of someone who had watched a world nearly die. "Pilot Garrett Stone," she said, her voice calm and resonant, translated seamlessly into his language. "The Pale Court acknowledges your actions. You will be summoned when the fleet has secured orbit." Garrett opened his mouth, closed it, then settled for a nod that he hoped translated as respectful rather than stunned. "Yes, Your Majesty. Happy to not be exploded anymore." Somewhere behind Vesrin, an aide stiffened, clearly unsure whether this was humor or a confession of incompetence. Vesrin herself tilted her head slightly, one long ear shifting, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement that Garrett somehow felt rather than saw. The channel closed. Garrett exhaled, long and slow, and leaned back in his seat. He laughed once, quietly, the sound echoing oddly inside the cockpit. He had saved a world. He had destroyed a flagship, and an alien queen with long ears and eyes like quiet stars had just told him to wait. As his ship drifted among the remnants of victory, Garrett couldn't shake the strange sense that the hardest part of the mission hadn't happened yet. Garrett learned very quickly that waiting aboard an alien warship was a different experience than waiting anywhere humans had ever designed. Time did not pass so much as it was politely escorted forward. The docking bay sealed around his fighter with a soft, harmonic vibration instead of the usual metallic clang, and the atmosphere equalized with a scent that reminded him faintly of rain and cold stone. His canopy lifted on its own, and a Pale Court honor guard was already standing at attention, long ears held upright in a posture that suggested ceremony rather than threat. They looked human enough to make him uneasy. Pale skin, dark or silver hair, calm expressions. But every time he adjusted his gaze, those elongated ears reminded him that he was very far from home. Their armor flowed instead of clanked, layered plates flexing subtly as they moved. One of them inclined her head, a gesture precise enough to be choreographed. "Pilot Garrett Stone," she said, "you will follow." Garrett considered making a joke about following being his primary skill set today, then decided not to test alien military humor just yet. He stood, stretched muscles that had been clenched for far too long, and followed them out of the bay. The corridor beyond was vast and luminous, its walls faintly translucent, revealing slow-moving patterns of light that shifted like distant galaxies. His boots made almost no sound. This bothered him more than it should have. They walked for what felt like both minutes and an hour. Along the way, Garrett caught glimpses of pale court personnel pausing in their work to watch him pass. Some looked openly curious, others respectful, a few faintly amused. One young officer stared at him with undisguised fascination until her superior cleared his throat sharply. Garrett offered a small wave. The officer's ears flushed a darker shade. He decided to log that as a cultural success. At last, massive doors parted silently, revealing the throne room. Garrett stopped without meaning to. The space was enormous, rising upward in sweeping arcs. Its ceiling opened to the stars through an energy veil that shimmered softly. Columns of pale crystal lined the chamber, each etched with symbols that pulsed gently, as if breathing. At the far end stood the throne, elegant, restrained, and unmistakably powerful. Queen Vestrin sat upon it, her posture immaculate. She wore ceremonial armor now, lighter in color than the battle gear he glimpsed earlier, shaped to emphasize authority rather than aggression. Her long ears were adorned with additional bands, each one catching the light. When she looked at him, the room seemed to quiet itself. Garrett walked forward alone, acutely aware of every step. He stopped where the markings on the floor suggested he should, then did the only thing that felt remotely safe. He bowed, not too deep, not too shallow, like someone who had watched exactly one documentary on alien etiquette and hoped for the best. A ripple of reaction passed through the assembled court. Vestrin's lips curved, just slightly. "You may stand," she said. "Your instincts are acceptable." Garrett straightened. "High praise. I'll put that on my resume." This time a few courtiers failed to suppress their amusement. Vestrin raised one hand, and silence returned as smoothly as it had left. She rose from the throne and descended the steps, each movement measured. Up close, Garrett noticed details he hadn't before. The fine texture of her skin, the controlled intensity behind her eyes, the way her long ears angled subtly toward him, as if listening more closely than necessary. "You fought with courage," Vestrin said, "and with creativity that borders on recklessness." "Yeah," Garrett said, unable to help himself. "I prefer to think of it as flexible survival instincts." She regarded him for a moment, then inclined her head. "The Pale Court values such instincts. Today, you will be honored before all." At a gesture from her, attendants approached bearing objects of clear significance: insignias, data crystals, ceremonial blades. Garrett accepted each in turn, nodding solemnly while internally wondering how many of these came with user manuals. Titles were spoken in a language that resonated through the chamber, their meanings translated softly into his calm implant. Landholder, protector, ally of the court. Each word carried weight, and with it, expectation. As the ceremony continued, Garrett became aware of something else beneath the formality. Vestrin's gaze lingered on him a fraction longer than protocol required. When their eyes met, there was curiosity there, and something more complicated that he couldn't name. He made a joke under his breath about hoping none of the titles required public speaking. One of the courtiers snorted before catching herself. By the time the final honor was bestowed, applause filled the chamber, measured, dignified, and genuine. Garrett stood amid it all, feeling oddly unsteady. He had faced enemy fire without flinching, but standing before an alien queen in her court, wrapped in gratitude and expectation, felt far more dangerous. And as Vestrin returned to her throne, Garrett sensed, without understanding why, that the ceremony had given him far more than it had taken from her. The ceremony did not end so much as it transformed. What had begun as a formal display of gratitude slowly shifted into something more fluid, as if the pale court itself were exhaling after holding its breath for an entire war. Music emerged from unseen sources, low and resonant, vibrating through the floor rather than the air. The courtiers loosened their rigid postures by degrees so subtle, Garrett wondered if they practiced relaxing in front of mirrors. He was guided, politely but unmistakably, toward a raised platform beside the throne, where a series of objects rested upon a luminous surface. A pale court official began explaining them in a measured tone. Garrett nodded at appropriate intervals, even when the explanation involved land grants measured in orbital paths and titles that appeared to require at least 3 generations of paperwork. He smiled when expected, bowed when necessary, and resisted the urge to ask whether any of this came with a return policy. Queen Vesrin observed the process with composed attention. From where she stood, she could see every reaction Garrett failed to hide. The flicker of surprise when a ship was mentioned, the slight widening of his eyes at the word independent command, the way his shoulders tensed when the court's approval washed over him like a physical force. He was not greedy. That much was obvious. He accepted the rewards carefully, almost cautiously, as if worried that taking too much might unbalance something fragile. When the final gift was revealed, a sleek data crystal containing ownership codes to a pale court vessel, there was a murmur through the chamber. Garrett stared at it, then up at Vesrin. "I just want to clarify," he said, keeping his voice low. "This is a ship, right? Not a ceremonial ship that explodes if I sit in the wrong chair." A pause, then Vesrin said, "It is fully functional." One of her long ears twitched. "And it does not explode easily." "Comforting," Garrett said. "I'll try not to test that." Laughter rippled through the court, restrained but real. Vesrin allowed it to happen. She felt the tension ease, felt the moment slip from rigid tradition into something warmer, more alive. This was dangerous territory. She knew it, and yet she did not stop it. The final words of the ceremony were spoken, ancient phrases of alliance and recognition that resonated with the ship itself. As they faded, the courtiers bowed deeply, to Vesrin first, then, unexpectedly, to Garrett. The gesture struck him harder than any title. He bowed back, awkward and sincere, hoping that intent translated where technique failed. Gradually, the court dispersed. Conversations resumed in hushed clusters. Attendants moved with quiet efficiency, clearing ceremonial objects and replacing them with refreshments that glowed faintly and smelled faintly alarming. Garrett was offered a drink that changed color when he touched it. He raised an eyebrow. "Is that a warning sign or a feature?" "It adapts," the attendant said proudly. "Of course it does." Vesrin descended from the throne once more, this time without the weight of ritual pressing on her every step. She approached Garrett, her expression composed but her gaze searching. Up close, the hum of the chamber seemed to soften, as if giving them space. "You have been granted much," she said. "I noticed," Garrett replied. "I'm going to need a very good accountant, possibly an interstellar one." Her lips curved again, that almost smile. "You are unchanged." "High praise again," he said. "I was worried saving a world might go to my head." She studied him in silence for a moment longer than necessary. Pale court law was precise about such moments, about distance, about gaze. Vesrin followed the letter of it carefully, even as something inside her strained against the rules. By custom, this was the point where a greater reward might be named, where ancient rites would be invoked. She did not speak them. Instead, she inclined her head. "You are free to depart when you wish. Your ship is prepared." The words were correct, proper, final. Garrett nodded slowly. Then, "Thank you, Your Majesty, for everything." He hesitated, then added, "For trusting me." Her long ears lowered just a fraction. "Trust," she said softly, "is a form of courage." He left the throne room shortly after, escorted once more through luminous corridors toward his new vessel. Vesrin watched him go, surrounded by victory, titles, in a court that believed the day complete. Only when he was gone did she feel the faint, unexpected hollow settle in her chest, quiet and insistent, asking a question no law had prepared her to answer. The corridors felt different on the return walk, as if the warship itself had shifted its mood now that celebration was officially sanctioned. The lights were warmer, the ambient hum slightly softer, and the pale court personnel no longer froze into ceremonial stillness when Garrett passed. A few even nodded to him, and one offered a respectful salute that Garrett returned a second too late, then compensated for by saluting again, just to be safe. The officer's long ears flicked in what Garrett decided was suppressed laughter. His new ship waited in a private hangar, sleek and unfamiliar, its hull pale and seamless, like something grown rather than built. As he approached, the vessel responded, faint symbols rippling across its surface in greeting. Garrett stopped short. "Okay," he said, "either you're sentient or I'm finally hallucinating from stress." The ship did not answer, but the boarding ramp lowered anyway, which he took as a promising sign. Inside, the interior adapted around him with quiet intelligence. Consoles shifted height, seating adjusted, and a soft tone indicated successful biometric recognition. An onboard AI introduced itself with a voice that was calm, precise, and completely incapable of understanding sarcasm. Garrett tested this immediately. "So," he said, settling into the command chair, "on a scale from 1 to catastrophic, how likely am I to accidentally start a diplomatic incident by pushing the wrong button?" "Clarification requested," the AI replied. "Define accidentally." Garrett grinned. "We're going to get along just fine." While Garrett familiarized himself with a ship that clearly considered him an interesting variable, Queen Vesrin stood alone on the observation platform of her warship. The court had fully dispersed now, their voices and footsteps fading into distant corridors. Only the stars remained, vast and indifferent, scattered across the transparent veil above her. Victory banners glowed faintly behind her, symbols of success that felt strangely heavy. She clasped her hands behind her back, posture perfect even in solitude. Her long ears lowered slightly, no longer bound by the need to display command. The silence pressed in, and with it came thoughts she had carefully avoided during the ceremony. She had followed the law. She had honored tradition. She had done everything expected of a pale court queen. And yet, watching Garrett's small vessel drift farther away on the tactical display, she felt none of the satisfaction she had anticipated. By the ancient codes, his deed entitled him to more than land and titles. It entitled him to choice, but also to claim. The greatest reward a warrior could receive was not property or power, but bond. Vesrin had known this when she spoke the words of dismissal. She had assumed confidently that a human would prefer freedom. Humans prized it above all else. That was what the history said. That was what logic dictated. Logic, she was discovering, was a poor companion in the aftermath of emotion. She replayed the moments of the ceremony in her mind. Garrett's awkward bow, his humor deflecting tension, the way he accepted honors without hunger. He had not looked like a man eager to escape. He had looked like someone trying very hard not to take up too much space. Vesrin exhaled slowly, a controlled release that did little to ease the ache forming behind her sternum. On his new ship, Garrett prepared for departure. Systems came online in smooth sequence, engines humming with restrained power. As he plotted a course, he glanced once more at the pale court warship dominating the hangar's edge. "You know," he told the AI, "I think I just peaked professionally. Everything after this is going to feel like paperwork." "Paperwork is statistically inevitable," the AI replied. "Figures." The hangar doors opened, revealing open space and distant stars. Clearance tones sounded, and Garrett guided the ship forward, feeling the subtle difference in its handling. Responsive, almost anticipatory. As the vessel slipped free of the warship's gravity field, Garrett felt an unexpected tug of hesitation. He told himself it was exhaustion, or delayed adrenaline, or maybe just the weirdness of being given a spaceship by an alien monarchy before dinner. Behind him on the observation platform, Vesrin watched his departure with eyes that reflected starlight in doubt in equal measure. She had given him freedom because she believed it was kindness. Now, standing alone amid victory, she wondered if it had been fear wearing the mask of wisdom. The stars offered no answers, only distance. The stars stretched ahead of Garrett in long, pale lines as his new ship accelerated away from the pale court fleet. The engines purred with a confidence he had not yet earned. and the navigation display projected a calm, orderly future full of plotted routes and recommended rest cycles. Garrett ignored most of it. He leaned back in the command chair, hands laced behind his head, and stared at the unfamiliar ceiling, which politely adjusted its lighting to match his apparent mood. He did not know what mood that was, but the ship seemed optimistic about it. "So," he said aloud, because silence had started to feel judgmental, "that went well. Saved a world, got a ship, didn't accidentally insult a queen. Strong day." "Your heart rate suggests unresolved cognitive dissonance," the AI replied. Garrett frowned. "Is that your way of saying I'm overthinking things?" "Yes." "Great. Glad we cleared that up." He was just beginning to relax. Well, as much as someone who had narrowly avoided death several times in the past 24 hours could relax, when the comm system chimed. Not the general channel, not fleet traffic, a private signal, encrypted with pale court command protocols. Garrett froze. "Okay," he muttered. "Either this is a heartfelt goodbye, or I forgot to return something extremely important." He straightened and accepted the transmission. For a moment, there was only static and the distant hum of the ship. Then Queen Vestrin's voice came through, softer than he had ever heard it, stripped of ceremony and projection. There was no visual feed, just her voice, close and quiet, as if she were speaking not across light years, but from just behind him. "Pilot Garrett Stone," she said. There was a pause, small but deliberate. "I am speaking outside the formal record." Garrett swallowed. "Understood, Your Majesty." Another pause. When she spoke again, her tone had changed. It carried no command now, only reflection. "By the laws of my people," Vestrin said, "a warrior who saves the throne is entitled to claim their greatest reward. Not land, not titles, not ships." Garrett's smile faded. He sat forward slowly, hands resting on the armrests. "I did not offer you that choice," she continued. "I assumed I knew what you would want. I believed granting you freedom was the honorable path." Her voice wavered, just slightly. "I believed I was doing right by you." The stars outside seemed to dim, or perhaps Garrett's focus had narrowed until nothing else mattered. "Yet," Vestrin said quietly, "as I watched you depart, I realized something I was not prepared for. I followed duty so closely that I did not listen to myself, or to you." Her long ears, unseen, would have lowered in a gesture of vulnerability few had ever witnessed. "I should have claimed you first." The words settled into the cockpit like a physical presence. Garrett did not speak. He was suddenly very aware of his own breathing, of the soft hum of alien machinery, of the vast distance between them that felt far too small and impossibly large all at once. Vestrin exhaled. "I do not recall you for an answer. This is not a command. It is a truth, one I needed to speak before silence made it permanent." Another pause. "You are free, Garrett Stone. Truly." The channel closed. For several long seconds, Garrett did nothing. Then he let out a laugh that came out rougher than intended. "Well," he said to the empty cockpit, "that's new." He rubbed a hand over his face. "I leave for 5 minutes and get emotionally ambushed by an alien queen." "Clarification," the AI said. "Is this what humans refer to as romance?" Garrett barked a laugh. "Buddy, I don't think humans know what that is either." He stood and paced the length of the cockpit, boots barely making sound on the adaptive floor. Freedom? That was what he had wanted, wasn't it? No oaths, no bonds, no expectations tied to a throne. And yet the image of Vestrin standing alone on her observation platform refused to leave his mind. Not the queen of ceremony and law, but the woman behind the crown, learning regret in real time. Garrett stopped pacing and looked back at the navigation display. One command would take him onward, into the open stretch of space he had earned. Another would turn the ship around. He sighed. "You know," he said to the AI, "I really thought freedom would feel less complicated." "Complication is a common byproduct of sentient interaction," the AI replied helpfully. Garrett smiled faintly. "Yeah, figures." Garrett stared at the navigation display long enough for the ship to dim its lights in what it apparently interpreted as a contemplative moment. Two projected paths hovered before him like opposing philosophies. One stretched forward into open space, clean and uncomplicated, full of unknowns that belonged only to him. The other curved back toward the Pale Court warship, heavy with implication, law, and a queen who had just admitted regret through a whisper that refused to fade. He laughed softly. "I save a civilization," he said, "and the hardest thing I do afterward is make a turn." The ship did not respond, but the engines idled patiently, awaiting a decision that could not be optimized by probability. Garrett thought of who he had been before the battle, someone skilled at surviving, at leaving before expectations could form. Freedom had always meant motion, distance, the absence of ties. Yet standing there now, he realized how hollow that definition felt when stripped of connection. Vezrin had not tried to bind him. She had given him choice, even when it hurt her. That mattered more than all the titles combined. "All right," he said, exhaling. "Let's try something new." He entered a single command. The ship adjusted course smoothly, stars shifting as the Pale Court warship grew once more on the display. On the observation platform, Queen Vesrin felt the change before it was announced. The tactical display updated quietly, registering an unexpected course correction. Her breath caught, an undignified reaction she did not bother to suppress now that she was alone. She straightened instinctively, long ears lifting as confirmation signals flowed in. Garrett Stone's vessel was returning. When he docked, the warship seemed to hum differently, as if aware that something unresolved was finally being addressed. Garrett disembarked without ceremony, wearing the same flight suit, carrying none of the symbols he had been given. He was met not by an honor guard, but by Vesrin herself. They stood facing one another in a quiet chamber overlooking the stars. Up close, she looked less like a ruler and more like someone waiting to hear an answer. Her long ears were unadorned now, her posture still regal but no longer armored by protocol. "You returned," she said. Garrett nodded. "Turns out freedom doesn't mean much if you spend it wondering what you ran away from." He scratched the back of his neck. "Also, your ship has better coffee." A beat of silence passed. Then Vesrin laughed, a soft, genuine sound that surprised them both. Some of the tension dissolved immediately, like pressure vented safely into space. "I did not summon you," she said carefully. "I know," Garrett replied. "I came because I wanted to. Big personal growth moment. Very uncomfortable." They spoke then, honestly and without ceremony, about laws and traditions, about fear disguised as wisdom, about the difference between being claimed and choosing to stay. Vesrin did not offer him a crown or a bond. Garrett did not offer her promises he was not ready to keep. Instead, they negotiated something entirely new. Time, presence, the willingness to learn one another without obligation. Later, as the Pale Court adjusted to a future that included a human who refused titles but accepted responsibility, Garrett stood once more beneath the stars. This time Vesrin stood beside him, no longer alone in her victories. He was still free, but now he understood that freedom was not the absence of connection. It was the choice to step toward it.